Hello and welcome. My name is Jessica Edwards and I am a student at Wright State University. In this video, I will be discussing ways to reduce extraneous cognitive load when designing online activities. We will be focusing on three principles, including the spatial contiguity principle, redundancy principle, and the signaling principle. First, let's talk about the spatial contiguity principle. This principle refers to aligning words to corresponding graphics. This means that a graphic that is being used as a learning tool should not be physically separated from the text. The spatial contiguity principle implies that words need to be aligned with graphics that correspond with the text. This principle also is used greatly in our healthcare field when we are constantly using graphs and images for learning. Where and how we label those graphs should be well thought out. For example, this picture on the slide both technically label the lobes of the brain. However, putting the names directly on the image versus below the image, we can reduce the extraneous cognitive load the student has. This closely relates to the signaling principle, which we will talk about later in this video. Another example of this would be where we put the text in relation to the image. We must make sure that the text is close to the image and the student does not have to visually track too far for the visual representation of the text. This slide is an example of really what not to do. The student's visual field is strained in a way that increases their cognitive load. Okay, so as mentioned before, in the healthcare, we often use graphs or images in our lessons. This really does allow our students to get a visual picture of the organ, the body part, or the process that we're discussing in class. So let's take a look at these two images on the screen. They look very familiar and both label parts of the heart. However, one image follows the spatial contiguity principle better. The graph on the left increases cognitive load by requiring the student to both relate a number and a name with each part of the heart. However, the graph on the right labels the parts of the heart on the actual heart, which decreases the cognitive load by eliminating the extra work for the student. So, in this case, it would be best to choose the image on the right versus the left. Okay, so the redundancy principle. This basically states that people learn better from graphics and narration than from graphics, narration, and on-screen text. Our minds will involuntarily read text that is on a screen. So it is natural that if text is added to a graphic, then we will first pay attention to the text, then the image. In some instances, that's okay. For instance, where there's no audio on an image, then naturally we must add text. However, if we have an image with narration and add text to that image, then it's just restating what the narration says, then it becomes redundant. In doing so, our brains will be focusing mostly on the redundant text instead of the graphic. By removing the unnecessary and the redundant text, we can alleviate cognitive load and allow the learner to focus on what the instructor is saying in the image on the screen. On-screen text is appropriate, however, when there is not an image, diagram, or graphic on the screen. If on-screen text is used, then it must be supplemental material that is not covered in the narration. For example, the picture above demonstrates what the redundancy principle might look like. On the picture on the right, you see the instructor verbalizing. On the picture on the left, you see the instructor verbalizing the exact text from the image. Without any supplemental information, both spoken and printed text, this can cause cognitive overload. Instead, simply show the image on the screen and then either narrate the info or provide written text. A few other ways that you can implement the redundancy principle into your online learning would include giving your online learners control over the audio and text. So you can give them control over whether they listen to the audio or read the text, include captions that can be turned on or off, as well as the audio that can be muted, so they can do one or the other. You can also use text to highlight the key points. So rather than repeating the what's on the screen verbatim, you can use text to simply highlight the key points with the text. This draws the learner's attention to the core concepts and ideas without overwhelming them with too much information. When you do this, the text becomes a support tool for the audio instead of conflicting with it. The last way you can use the redundancy principle is by offering helpful tips. So integrate the text with audio by offering your audience helpful tips that are not mentioned in the narration. To do this, you could include additional slides or screens that give them a chance to read the tips without having to focus on the audio component. Okay, so let's go back to the example of the heart. Here is an example of what the redundancy principle might look like. If showing this slide to a classroom, and this is what I said to them. Blood from the body flows into the right atrium, flows into the right ventricle, then into the lungs, through the pulmonary artery. Then blood becomes oxygenated and travels back into the heart, through the left atrium and through the pulmonary veins. The blood then travels through the left ventricle and back into the body through the aorta. Throughout the heart, valves manage the flow of blood into and out of the chambers. So I literally just spoke the exact words that are on the slide. So this makes that redundant. So let's look at what might be a better way to demonstrate this. So instead we might have just the image on the screen that has each of the parts labeled from the heart, and accompanying it with the same narration from the previous slide. I'm not going to go over that narration again, but pretty much just removing the on-screen text that was being redundant by saying it, by narrating it as well. So this eliminates the redundancy and thus minimizes the cognitive load. Okay, the signaling principle. This refers to the concept that students' learning improves when information is organized and cues are given to highlight the main ideas that are used. This principle is one of the most important steps to developing multimedia content and one of the many things that can be used to reduce unnecessary information hindering the learning process. It is important that information is presented and the learner focuses on information in the correct order to achieve maximum benefit. How competent the learner is about the topic will really determine what information they notice first. So a beginning level student might generally focus on more prominent text first. This can cause problems if prominent information is not relevant to the subject matter, and thus it'll increase their cognitive load. There are many ways that we can use the signaling in content, many ways. When using an image, you can use icons or boxes around information to direct the attention to the items you wish to stand out. You can even number sections and information to help draw attention in a certain order or organization to the learner. When providing text-based content, you can use the bold function to highlight words or to change colors for importance. You can always just use different inflection with your voice to call attention to certain things as well. In the picture on the screen, arrows are guiding the learner's attention through the process of cell separation. So it's starting at the inner phase, the arrows are pointing to the next phase so that their attention starts at the beginning and follows the arrows through the cell separation. So again, let's look at the heart, our heart example. When showing this slide and providing the narration that we did before, we could use signaling to show the actual flow of blood by highlighting the path. So it would look something like this. Blood from the body flows through the right atrium. Then it flows through the right ventricle. From there, it goes into the lungs through the pulmonary artery. The blood then becomes oxygenated and travels back into the heart through the left atrium and through the pulmonary veins. The blood then travels through the left ventricle and back into the body through the aorta. Throughout the heart, there are several valves that manage the flow of blood into and out of the chambers. So by using signaling, we we can highlight the flow of blood throughout the heart and give our students a signal or a cue to what you are saying in your narration. So these are just a few ways that you can reduce extraneous cognitive load when you're preparing your activities. There are many more as well. However, like I said, this just focuses on three of the ones that I feel like are kind of the easiest to make changes in activities that you may already have. So thank you for joining me. And the next page you'll find my references.